So let me introduce to Stewart Butterfield, who basically was raised as a hippie, then founded two gaming companies that failed spectacularly, and will become billionaire next year, I would say. He's the founder of Flickr, as you all know. And now he's doing something completely different. He's running a company called Slack. Who's using Slack? Wow, OK. So we thought about explaining what Slack is all about. Could you explain what Slack is all about?
I can. Slack is a messaging platform for teams used primarily in the tech industry, but spreading now to media, creative industries, and outside. It's if you've used SMS or Facebook messaging or WhatsApp or anything like that, then you're one of 1.5 billion people who have really come to messaging over the last 5 years. It feels like something that's been with us forever, but it's relatively recent. So Slack is messaging for internal communications in companies that brings together not just the messages from human beings, but messages from external systems. So things like filing a bug report on your software will cause a message into Slack, or when someone tweets at your company, it'll come into Slack, or when someone creates a customer support ticket using Zendesk, then it gets posted into Slack, or any one of 100 other services. The result is that a company gets all of its communication in one place, and it becomes searchable.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is that Slack is just it's not totally correct, but it's a feature of your last gaming company, which didn't get much traction. And the same happened 10 years before with Flickr, which was basically a spin-off of another gaming company.
Yes.
Is there a pattern? And what does it mean?
Trying to build massively multiplayer games are a very difficult technical challenge, so perhaps it's good practice for making any kind of software, and a nice warm-up for doing something else.
Actually, you're the poster boy of Pivot, in a way. So you were one of the first entrepreneurs in the Valley doing something completely different with the rest of the money, which you're doing now again. So we have prepared a slide. Can you show that? So this is just wanted to show you. It's a tweet of Mark Andreessen some time ago, and he was just amazed by the growth after putting online Slack. Slack sounds a little boring, so there's a great profile in Wired about the most boring company in the world and the quite interesting person running it. And the funny thing is, you posted an update sometime later. Can we show the second chart? So this is what happened after Mark Andreessen, who was really impressed about the growth.
I should actually interject for a second, because I get asked sometimes for advice to other entrepreneurs. One good piece of advice that this brings to mind is use a very high axis on your charts. It looks much more impressive.
So, and then backstage, I asked Stuart, so is this still correct? Oh no, we have an update. So can we show the update, please? So this is another scale now. You know, it's exponential, obviously, so you had to change scale, and this is the actual growth, but it's historical. So at the moment, it's 3 times
it's about 3 times larger than that.
So this is, in one word, a little crazy. It never happened before with companies' software. So you have to explain in detail what's the secret of your success.
I get in trouble from the PR team when I say this, but I have no fucking idea why it happens. There's definitely, we did a good job, and we're smart and capable, and the design is as good as we can make it, but I think it's also a matter of timing. People, and in the context of the future of work, people, I think, fail to appreciate the changes that have happened, especially in the last 5 years, bringing another 800 million people into Facebook and introducing the idea of social interaction as something that happens online. If you think about 10 years ago, the hot phone that you could have was a Motorola Razr, and people were so proud of their Razrs that they would put them on the table during lunch. So it was a long time, it was maybe 8, years ago. I think it was just 8 years ago that the iPhone was announced. It was another maybe 7 years before it was available. It was 6 years since we actually had an app store. So it feels like we've had fantastic internet connections ambiently all around us forever, and it feels like we've had these amazing devices in our hands forever, and it feels like we've had apps forever, but it's really been a very short number of years. So I think if we had started Slack 3 years earlier, it would have not been nearly as successful, or maybe it would have been a complete failure. So the modality of communication that comes from these short messages is something that most people here in the audience will have been familiar with for a long time, because many people here will have used BlackBerrys 12 years ago, or some of you will be Scandinavian teenagers 12 years ago and would have used SMS. But that was a very small pocket of people, and even use of things like MSN Messenger, Yahoo Messenger, AOL, ICQ was a minority of the group of people who used the internet 8, 10, 12 years ago, which is a tiny subset of the people who use it now. So that the time is ripe, I think, for this kind of product.
Maybe so one reason of your success is the love for the tiny details. And if you zoom back to your history, I made a list of all the features that Flickr promoted or invented even, so the famous interestingness feature where you could, for the first time, which blew me away at that time, see the most interesting pictures in millions of pictures by a new kind of filter. Tagging was made popular by Flickr, invented by Delicious, but nobody used it there. So the open API was first used by Flickr, and so on and so on. So maybe it's important that people with original ideas, you're a philosopher, not a kind of coder, technical guy, go into the valley and do interesting things. It's about thinking different?
I think it's about, I got my first access to the internet in 1992 when I arrived at university and got an account on the school's Unix system. And I had friends who had gone to different universities, so I'd use email to keep in touch with them. I discovered Usenet. And so this is, technically the web existed in 1992, although almost no one would have heard of it. There's maybe a couple thousand websites at the time. But other applications of the internet for communication were big. And one of the things that stuck out for me from that time and all the way through was the power to connect people. So I grew up in a smaller town in British Columbia, and I was very interested, and this is embarrassing to say now, but very interested in the music of a band called Fish, an East Coast US band, and no one in my hometown liked them. But in 1992, you could use the internet for music distribution as well. Instead of Napster, it was people dubbing cassette tapes and putting them in padded envelopes and mailing them across the country. And in fact, when I got online, rec.music.gdead, Grateful Dead, was the biggest single source of traffic on the internet. But it wasn't just that. It was no matter what you were interested in. I like you said, I was a student of philosophy, so and I was especially interested in the history and philosophy of science, and within that, especially 19th century biology. So that's a pretty niche thing, but there was a community of people who were interested in the history and philosophy of 19th century biology online. But just like there were people who were interested in model trains. So if you're a model train enthusiast, or if you were a breast cancer survivor, or a genealogist, or historian, or whatever your interests were, there was a community of people you could find online. So I think that the one common thread through those things like tagging, things like interestingness, the open API, many of which made it into Slack, was using the internet for what it is best for, which is a platform for human beings to connect.
Now you're pulling in, so since you're growing like crazy, everyone wants to invest in Slack. And so it's something like 150 to 180 million. So how much is still there? A lot of money is still there for the next crisis.
Yeah.
So you're safe, basically. So I was wondering where this is heading. What will you do with all the money? So will you become the next? So will you be the next ecosystem like Microsoft was in the 80s?
That's the
90s?
goal, I think. So when I first got started making my living doing computer stuff, it was the mid-late 90s, and anyone who was in the industry then used Microsoft things for almost everything. So we used Windows on the desktop, and we had Windows for workgroups at work groups set up for local networking. Microsoft Server Technologies used Outlook for communication. I worked at a design agency, so we used MS Project and had that hooked up to Outlook through custom VB script. I'm sorry, this is a little bit boring, but there's a bunch of Microsoft technologies that made all Microsoft stuff work well together, things like OLE and ActiveX. And now you fast forward, and for every product category that Microsoft once dominated, there's a dozen good vendors offering services that are as popular or more. So, I mean, things like source control for programmers, things like document editing and creation, things like customer relationship management, but also whole new categories that didn't exist back then. Application performance monitoring is something that didn't exist in 1998. So from the perspective of a business customer, and from the perspective of all, everyone who's using software at work, which will be every single person here, it's a much better world. Software is much, much cheaper, it's more powerful, it's easier to use, it's simpler to deploy and manage. And I think in every respect, it's better than it once was, with one exception, and that's that nothing works well together. And it's not intentional at all, but business customers' information ends up getting siloed into different services. So for example, if you use, as we do, Zendesk again, to manage customer issues, and you use GitHub, for example, to manage issues among your developers, you end up with two different repositories of information that would more naturally be joined together and would result in a better time or an easier time for the business to respond to its customers effectively. Slack is intending to be a platform where all that information comes together. So we have maybe something like 400,000 integrations that customers have set up that post 3 million messages a day from all different kinds of services. And all of that becomes searchable as well.
Could you grow beyond that company market? Like, could you market Slack to my mother in 2 years, like for families or to Steffi and organizing her big family with Slack? Would that be a growth?
We do hear
scenario?
about families using Slack, and we do hear about community uses. And there's a website that I just saw last week called slackchats.com, which lists public community versions of it. I think we have our hands full in the business market already, so it's unlikely that we would do that. There's also something about having things kind of neatly partitioned that make it a lot easier for humans to think about it. So when I open my phone and I see the Slack app icon, I know that when I tap it, it will just be the people I work with. It's all the people I work with and only the people I work with. Whereas when I open my email, it's a lot of someone followed me on Twitter, my monthly statement is available, it's email from family, it's email from friends, it's from former colleagues, it's from my current colleagues, it's from people I work with outside the company, my investors, and it's a giant mess of different kinds of information, which has a very high cognitive cost to process and separate. So this is a long answer, but it's possible in the future, but in the short term, certainly unlikely.
Actually, we met 10 years ago, and I thought a lot about you and your life. I read all the news, you sold Flickr. Actually, you sold Flickr, I think, 2 months after the first DLD. And I said, oh no, Flickr, how could you do that? And I think you had some, and then, for example, Glitch, you worked 4 years on a game that basically didn't work for the second time. So can you share the secret of how you kind of survive the phases of depression and stuff like that? It's easy to sit here with all that money on your bank account, but there has to be another world which makes you successful at the end.
Believe me, it doesn't help in terms of depression or waking up. I bet most people here, like at least half of you, wake up and the first thing you do is check your phone before you even get out of bed, and I'm the worst at it. I get up, I don't even have my contact lenses in, so I'm squinting at my phone like this, and I'm reading these emails, and I'm getting angrier and more depressed. So by the time I get out of bed, 45 minutes later, I can barely tolerate the thought of going to the office. So being successful and having money in the bank doesn't help, I think. But we try to attribute as much as possible the success to the external conditions, to it being good timing and luck, so we don't pat ourselves on the back too much. On the other hand, we try to attribute the failures as much as possible to our own decisions so that we can learn as much as possible from them. And I would say among those, and this is maybe a more serious piece of advice to entrepreneurs, if you can't communicate what the product is or what the service is or what the business does in such a way that the person you're telling it to can then go on and communicate it to someone else, it's very unlikely to be successful. And I think that was the big lesson that we failed to learn the first time we tried to build this game. And now I have learned after the second time, because the game took 15 minutes to explain. It was a massively multiplayer game, but there was no combat. It was surreal and absurd and kind of like Monty Python, and I could go on for 15 minutes. And maybe if you heard it from me, the CEO, then you would understand it, but it would be a hopeless task for you to go on to explain it to someone else. So I know as an editor, managing editors, managing writers, you'll probably have many moments where you get something back from a writer and you want to know what it is in one sentence. You know, you want to know what the pitch is. Well, okay, maybe not. And certainly I know that many reporters want to get that from PR people who deal with them. Sending them a pitch, they want to get like the one sentence, very quick version of it. And I forget how, or I have now since learned how important that is, to have a very concise idea that can be transmitted from person to person.
Actually, this conversation is named The Future of Work. So we have to talk about the future. And you said an interesting thing yesterday. You said the present is I don't know anything about the future, but the present is underrated.
Yeah, I think it is. And so, I mean, not to harp on this thing of having the magic phones in our pocket, but Freud wrote about the machines that were available at the turn of the century as kind of giant prosthetics for people. So a man with a digging machine could do the work of 20 men and much faster and more efficiently. Economists famously are not so good at measuring the productivity impact of software, or at least there was a period up to maybe 2000 where it was impossible to measure any positive impact. And then in the 2000s, we thought that we did, and now we're back to the point where there doesn't seem to be any measurable impact on productivity through software. But obviously there is, because having a phone in your pocket is like being telepathic. You can communicate with anyone else on the surface of the planet, literally no matter where they are, and literally at the speed of light, which is fun. I mean, it's impossible to imagine this. And especially if you put it in the context of human beings as a species. If any other species got the ability to coordinate and share information at the speed of light across the surface of the planet, like if snakes got that, then we would all be dead. Snakes would have taken over the world. It also can make you clairvoyant. You know the traffic on the next street before you get there, and Google can tell you the best route. I have a friend who's a sailor, and he used to have to send away to get the charts for the tides and where the rocks were, and it would take weeks to get them back in the mail. Or I used to have to go to the library when I was a child and look up bits of information, and now all of that is available. And I think that we underestimate the impact of that in the short term. And when I try to speculate about the future, someone yesterday used the American colloquialism, "you ain't seen nothing yet." I think that's definitely true. In terms of the amount of information available and the kind of our ability to use computers to organize and filter and amplify and take advantage of human interaction, it's pretty remarkable.
Unfortunately, our time is up, so I have one last. It's not a question, it's an imperative. No. Don't sell Slack.
Okay. No problem.
You won't, will you?
No.
Never?
I'm 41 now, and I will almost certainly not have another opportunity this big again, so there's no incentive to sell.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, great.